Hello there, this is Mad Squirrel with a classic movie review with my lovely co-host slash hostess, Lady Peri. Hi, Lady Peri.
Hello.
She's going to join me today. We're going to be reviewing a film that we both love and we have talked about, God, too many times. We'll say it that way nicely. Is The Thin Man with William Powell and Myrna. This is by Dashiell Hammett. It's written based on one of his books. The film came out in 1934, and it is one of those types of films that not a lot of people have heard about, which is kind of sad, really. Do you remember the first time you heard about The Thin Man, Perry?
It was probably 10 years ago. I think looking around on YouTube, needing some background sort of noise when I was doing stuff around the house. And that's when the first time I'd heard about it. Never heard about it before that.
It's one of those films that, well, not everyone's heard about it, and I think it's underrated, underappreciated, let's put it that way. At the time, it was very popular. It was a widely successful film that led to a longer series of films and even a TV series, which came out, I believe, in the 50s. So The Thin Man follows the investigations of former detective Nick Charles, and his ever witty and well-to-do wife, Nora Charles. And they also, along with their dog Asta at their side, they investigate into mysterious murders or crimes. This particular film, however, they're going to be investigating the murder of a private secretary to a mysterious employer who is also missing, and the trio embark on the investigation. So the Thin Man series, without question, is one of Hollywood's most, I would say, wittiest and it's just one of the more, I think, so out of the norm in the 1930s. Now, this was pre-code in the 1930s, but let's take a moment first to kind of tap on the big one, is that the film came out with the Hayes production code was originally implemented, but loosely enforced early on. So after Prohibition ended, which was in 1933, December 5th of 1933. That's when the 21st Amendment was ratified, and that ended Prohibition, which had been up for 13 years and 10 months and 19 days after it began. The Thin Man came out about a year later. So there's a lot of drinking in this movie. Hey-oh.
There's a lot.
Oh, yeah. And, but with the Hayes production code, that was loosely enforced. So that was supposed to curtail the exhibition of like sexual innuendo, heavy drinking, exploitation of non-conservative lifestyles. Okay. So MGM got away with Nick and Nora's Quench for the spirits for the early Thin Man films before the MMPA required the studio to curtail those antics. So in response, screenwriters reformed the couple with the arrival later on in the films of Nick Jr., and then a sobering return to Nick Charles' hometown, which was in The Thin Man Goes Home in 1945. That was later in the series of films, but this one we're focusing on the very first film of the series. The Thin Man actually did win some awards and nominations. The Academy Awards nominations were for Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, which was William Powell, Best Director of W.S. Van Dyke, Best Writing and Adaptation by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. It also received a National Board Review Award in 1934 for Top 10 Best Films. And it received, in 1997, the National Film Preservation Board. It was one of their winners for preservation. In 2017, it received the Online Film and Television Association Film Hall of Fame for Motion Picture Award. But the film itself had a lot of wonderful actors, and we're going to get into that really quickly. The big one that you see on your screen here is the original author of the book, The Thin Man. That's Dashiell Hammett, and he was born May 27, 1894 in St. Mary's County, Maryland. And he had a very interesting background. He's done a lot of great films, books that were later became films or were in the talks of being films. Uh, he had a history of he worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency in the Baltimore branch in 1915. He enlisted in the U.S. Army's Ambulance Corps in June of 1918 and was posted to a camp 20 miles from Baltimore, where he got the flu and it developed into tuberculosis. He got out of the Army in July of 1919 and returned to Pinkerton's detective agency. And Hammett then entered the Veterans Hospital near Tacoma with TB in 1920. Upon entering the Veterans Hospital, um, that's when he started really considering writing more. So when he was finally released, and he was working back at the Pinkerton Spokane branch there in Washington, he was hospitalized again with tuberculosis, and he met a nurse there, courted her, and they eventually married. But he ended up going in 1921 to the Army Hospital in San Diego. He eventually released. He married the nurse that he had met there in Washington, and they married in San Francisco. Hammett then worked for the San Francisco branch of Pinkertons, but then left the agency in roughly 1921 to 22 due to his ill health. And around that time, he took a writing course, and he just started writing for different magazines, specifically the Smart Set during 1922, and some short stories to others. He began to sell detective stories to the Black Mask, which is another publication from 1923. So after the birth of the couple's second daughter in 1926, he gave up freelance writing and became an advertising copywriter for the jeweler Albert Samuels, and he only stayed there for 6 months due to his ill health. Forced by his TB to live apart from his wife and children, the marriage eventually broke up. He supported himself through his writing, chiefly through the Black Mask magazine, which he was under the editor of Joe Shaw. So Hammett's long short stories were republished in a novel formed by Alfred Snof. I get a cookie for bad pronunciation. But in 1929, Hammett moved to New York, and after the success of his novel, The Maltese Falcon, he was engaged as a screenwriter by Paramount and moved to Hollywood, where he met Lillian Hellman, which became his life partner. He returned to New York in 1931, where he wrote The Glass Key. The Thin Man was also published in a magazine as a magazine serial in 1933. Hammett was encouraged by Hearst to write the Secret Agent X9 comic strip, which ran from 1934 to 35, his last original work. In 1942, he reenlisted in the Army and was posted to a station off of the islands of Alaska, where he edited the Adkinian. When he was discharged in 1945, he returned to New York and became president of the New York Civil Rights Congress. And then in 1951, Hammett was subpoenaed to testify on the Civil Rights Congress bail fund and was jailed for refusing to answer questions. Upon his release from jail, he was presented with a bill by the IRS for over $111,000 in back taxes. So in failing health, he lived off and on with Hellman. So in 1961, he was admitted to New York's Lenox Hospital, where he died on January 10th. So he struggled most of his life with his tuberculosis. But he was known for The Red Harvest, published in 1929, The Maltese Falcon, 1930, and The Thin Man, which all originally were books of his. And if there's a photo of him in his nice suit, but what's funny is he's on the cover as The Thin Man, which is even greater. So he has a very interesting background, and a lot of people have spoken very highly of him, of his works and his writings. These are types of things that stick with people over time. A couple little facts about him is that director George Lucas tipped his hat to Hammett by naming one of his companies Black Falcon after the bird in the Maltese Falcon. Also, the Star Wars spaceship, the Millennium Falcon. The code name for Star Wars Return of the Jedi was Blue Harvest, a reference to Hammett's Red Harvest. And even though, while not accredited, his novel Red Harvest, Hammett's, was the inspiration for the film Yojimbo in 1961, later remade as A Fistful of Dollars in 1964, aka also known as For a Few Dollars More, and also When the Raven Flies 1984, and The Last Man Standing 1996. So the book, though, The Thin Man, was originally released in 1934, and the film was based on the novel of the same name by by Dash, which was his nickname. So Dashiell went by Dash. We'll call him Dash. A subsequent 5 films followed, none of which were written by Hammett, nor did the author pen any additional books in the Thin Man series. That's important to note here. So this film is the only film that he directly had a link to. A TV series did follow in the late 1950s from September 20th, 1957 to August 28th of 1959 called The Thin Man. But that didn't last very long, obviously. So that's a little background about Dash. We could do like literally a whole series just on him and his background, but that's another time, another dollar, if you will.
I just find it interesting that his suffering, his illness, gifted us with so much. So what he suffered was horrible. His illness, I couldn't imagine all that he went through, but we were gifted such art because of what he went through.
Yeah. And it's all perspectives, right? Every person, like
Mm-hmm.
artist has their suffering, I guess. And writer, especially writers, my God. But, I think it's a great legacy to have, for his children. Um, from what I can tell, he really felt the character of the Thin Man was kind of loosely based on himself and his partner at the time. And so it's kind of like vicariously he was projecting himself, which all writers do to some extent. But something like the Maltese Falcon, oh my God, like that's an amazing film. The
Yes.
book's even better, and I think it's one of those things where these are gifts that we'll continue to keep giving because it's so hard to find well written. It's like Agatha Christie, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are authors that made their mark in a very particular way in their writing and how they saw situations or perspectives. Because you know how we'll watch like a certain type of film and we're like, oh, you could call it before it happens.
Yeah. Especially with modern films, you really can do that.
You're like, okay, like, that's the unfortunate part. And then if it's a film that tricks the audience, some audiences get mad now. It's like, no, that's the point of great writing, is being tricked a little bit without offending your audience. That's the harder part.
If it makes sense, then you shouldn't be offended. But if it's like the M. Night Shyamalan twist at the end where it's like, where did that even come from?
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Because, that's one way to make the audience mad, make them watch an M. Night movie. Oh, man. I love M. Night. I like The Village. I don't care. I know people didn't like it, but I liked it a lot. And it was one of those twist films. But it was so well done. That's what suspense is. It's like when you watch Alfred Hitchcock, that's not for everybody, But I can appreciate the well-written craft of it, And also the fact that it's an adaptation, whether that's the Psycho, the book Psycho, for example, being translated into a film. There's an art form to it to get the right feeling and the right pacing. And I think with the Thin Man series, they took a really great idea and ran with it at the right time. So the Thin Man, though, made a big impact, I think, especially in the 30s and coming out of Prohibition. It was like somebody opened up the party house and said, everybody come on in. But this film was directed by W.S. Van Dyke, also known as Major W.S. Van Dyke. He was born in 1889. He died in 1943. He directed over 90 films, a very well-respected director, but he had rapid-fire shooting methods that earned him the nickname One Take Woody. And he was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, Best Director for San Francisco, 1937, which is a great film, by the way, and Best Director of The Thin Man, 1935, which is what we're experiencing right now. That was the year it was actually nominated for the Academy Award. So he received a Hollywood Walk of Fame star in 1960. His background is kind of a sad one. We're not going to dive too deep into it. He did a lot of wonderful work in his career. He suffered with a lot of different things in his life over the course of time. He had a drinking issue, from what I understand, but he had a reputation among his colleagues for a little bit of sloppiness with his directing. But Van Dyke was, at his best, a strong technician who elicited spontaneous performances from his actors, some of whom went on to receive Oscar nominations under his direction, such as William Powell, Spencer Tracy, Norma Shearer, Robert Morley. So he had this one take mentality because he liked natural reactions and natural chemistry of his actors, and that comes across really well in The Thin Man, as an example. But with the Major Van Dyke, He committed suicide at 53 after a very long battle with heart disease and cancer. He had refused most medical treatment because of his Christian Science beliefs. So he died relatively young, and it was, I would say, a major blow for the Hollywood industry, for sure. But a lot of great films under his belt. I don't want to get into all of them at this time because I have actually touched on him before in other reviews and things like that. But he's a really interesting guy. But these are some photos from behind the scenes on the set of The Thin Man, and I thought these were really interesting. But he's just sitting down talking to his actors. They rolled through this pretty well overall, from what I understand. But he has a very, I would say, glowing career that was overshadowed by a lot of personal difficulties. But as far as our cast here, and here's where we meet our people, is William Powell, born in 1894, died in 1984. Myrna Loy, who was born in 1905, died in 1993. Uh, well, this is a good part. They both play Nick and Nora Charles, married, and there's a dog Asta in between them, who
In a
will
very
definitely
okay.
tap on. Well, we'll know. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
In a very, you had said about chemistry with the actors, as regards to the director, and these two really have such natural chemistry. They're so believable as a married
Hmm.
couple in this film.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And the thing is that they went on to star in 14 films together. So, not counting, no, this is, this is counting the Thin Man series, but they starred in 14 films together. They had this really wonderful chemistry between the two of them. So, it's interesting because when he was working with Myrna, he was quoted as saying, "When we did a scene together, we forgot about technique, camera angles, and microphones. We weren't acting. We were just two people in perfect harmony. Many times I've played with an actress who seemed to be separated from me by a plate glass window, and there was no contact at all. But Myrna, unlike some of the actresses who think only of themselves, has the happy faculty of being able to listen while the other fellow says his lines. She has that give and take of acting that brings out the best." And he also said that even my best friends never failed to tell me the smartest thing I ever did was marry Myrna Loy on the screen.
And that's what I found that one, and that made me laugh because I thought it's so true. They're such a natural couple together. And I'd also found where Myrna Loy had said of William Powell, "I never enjoyed my work more than when I worked with William Powell. He was a brilliant actor, a delightful companion, a great friend, and above all, a true gentleman." And that just warmed my heart. That was just so sweet that they had that relationship with
Yeah,
each other.
it is so true because you see it on the screen, and the Thin Man, especially this being the first one, it's a very unusual relationship from the very beginning, which we are going to talk more about here in a second. We're just doing the intros to the cast. We're not going to dive, for those listening, we're not going to dive like heels deep into a canyon of talk here about every single actor, but these are our two major players of the film, and they both do bring a natural chemistry to the role. It was very, looking at it from the perspective of a 2021, looking back on this film, you know, I can see this being kind of like, wow, back then that was kind of like unusual for a married couple to interact with each other a certain way. There was always this like ball and chain uh, stereotype, right, of marriage, and they took that away by their interactions and what they would say to each other. And as the films progressed to the sequels, you definitely see that change, which is good. It's in a more progressive manner, but in such a way that it's done in such a classy manner, it normalizes it, even though people outside of them are like, what the hell, you
Yeah.
know they're like, what is wrong with them? And to them, this mild form of chaos is normalized, you know and it's not too chaotic where it's uncomfortable. It's just the right temperature for that couple, and then that's where you kind of see them connect. But the two of them, yes, are definitely a perfect match for this role, and they did so well. And our other cast member is Asta, which is Skippy, played by Skippy. uh, Skippy was born in 1931, died sometime during the 1940s. It's not very clear, but Asta is the beloved dog of both Nick and Nora. He's a spunky, wired hair fox terrier. He was owned and trained by former silent screen comedian Gail Henry and her husband, MGM property master Henry East. They were both highly respected for their animal training in Hollywood. For Skippy, his 10-year film career includes 9 motion pictures. This is the Thin Man series, Topper Returns, Bringing Up Baby. That's the one with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. That was a funny movie. Anyway, but Asta's made his mark.
And he did pretty well financially. So the normal movie actors, animal actors at that time were paid about $13 a week. He earned between $200 and $250, and his trainer only earned $60 a week.
I hope you like your money. Wow. Wow. Well, Skippy did well for himself. But I know that as time went on, I know that they did have to kind of switch out Asta the dog, Skippy, with one of his, quote, children, to kind of take over that role for brief periods of time due to health and age, but they looked almost identical. So it was said in a couple of the films that it wasn't Skippy as much as it was like his son, to say the least. But needless to say, though, Skippy is Skippy, still goes by Asta. Different names. It's funny how they give an accreditation to animals in films, so their names will change based on the characters, or they'll just leave it as the fictional name. But eventually, Skippy did go to Asta as their name, which is kind of funny. So, but yeah, that's a little background on Asta. We have to bring up Asta because, well, he is the star, just along with William Powell and Myrna. So, the next actress that we have in the film who plays a minor role is Maureen O'Sullivan, who was born in 1911, died in 1998. And the really interesting thing about Maureen is that she was known for Tarzan the Ape Man from 1932. Maureen O'Sullivan was an Irish-born American actress. She was best known for playing Jane in that Tarzan series during the era of Johnny Westmuller, which is the original Tarzan. In 2020, she was enlisted at number 8 on the Irish Times list of Ireland's greatest film actors, and she is also the mother of actress Mia Farrow. So she has a role in this film, which I really enjoyed her role. It wasn't like a huge role, but it was a starting role in her career. So this is early on. Around this time, though, she was still doing Tarzan, so that's her on set, and I believe that W.S. Van Dyke also directed some of the Tarzan films. The other actors and actresses that we're going to touch on, we're just going to touch on a couple of the headliners that were included. One was Nate Pendleton, born in 1895, died in 1967. And then Minna Gombell, who was born in 1892 and died in 1973. Now, the film itself, this is the part where we start dipping in a little bit. Oh, man. So, I don't know. What were your first takeaways from the film?
Well, I saw the movie probably about 10 years ago for the first time, and I'd watched it, I say watched it in quotes, a few times since, but it was always something that kind of was background. And so I thought it was funny. I liked the relationship. I thought, they're, a couple of smart asses with each other. It was fun to watch as a background, but only recently when we decided this was the film we're going to talk about, and I sat down and really watched it, I thought, this is really good.
Right.
And it has more depth than what I gave it credit for in the past.
Exactly. Because it's like when you're watching it at the time, because that's the best way to watch this film, I think, is for me, I wanted something that was, no offense, but entertaining without it being too complicated, lack of better words. And this is one of those films. I wanted something that was going to be enjoyable, easy to watch. I could step away and still be able to hear it and know what's going on. And this film you can kind of do that with, but I've watched this film too many times. So, like rewatching it is easy. It's an easy rewatch. That's the first thing. But the characters are very likable from the onset, and you can totally see the transition of the characters over time. But Nick and Nora, now this is something, this is what we've touched about a lot. Their interactions with one another are very non-traditional, even in the 1930s. But now we look at it and go, I like this. I like this a lot. What were your, I guess, how do you feel that how they were portrayed? What was your take about their interactions on screen in this first film of the Thin Man series?
They really loved each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are little things that they would say back and forth to each other that, Nora wanting him to get back into being a detective, that she really wanted him to have that for himself. She really wanted him to be happy. And even though they did live off her inheritance, they weren't,
Right.
she didn't want him to just, she knew he wasn't happy, I think.
Right.
And they were also, they saw each other as equals. I think you had talked about, nowadays, this is what we like, this is what we want to be. And I think, I hate to say it like this, but I think so much they would go on Twitter and say #relationship goals.
Right.
Because they were absolutely equals. There was no talking down to one another, or him talking down to her, like you said, in the older movies would have been expected.
Mm-hmm.
There was no doofy character that one had to kind of prop up. They both saw each other as equals, and, like I said, really genuinely loved one another and respected each other.
And I think what's even more curious is that, like, there was a couple instances where, he had to outwit her to keep her out of danger.
Yes.
And he went out of his way to do so. It wasn't like, really dumb things. You know what I mean? Like in other films, in old classic films, like they would dupe the woman by doing something like, or any character they considered below them. Okay, that could be a mass category of types, right? Of minorities and females, where they would out-trick them in like the most dumb way. Like he actually had to go out of his way to trick her so he could get stuff done to keep her out of danger. And she'd get mad at him, but then she'd understood why he did it. But he also didn't insult her intelligence in the process.
Not at all.
And that's what I kind of took away from a couple of things that, not just in this film, but in other films. And their relationship was that where they did have mutual respect for each other, but they knew how to play with one another. This is just a screen cap from one of the scenes where he's comforting Maureen O'Sullivan, and she walks in and sees them hugging, and he makes that face at her first, and she responds with that face, and the girl looks over, and Nora's face is back to normal again. So it's like these inside jokes between the both of them that only the audience, as a third party looking in, can see this interaction between the two main players of the story. But they have a very cute dynamic between the both of them.
And I found the script notes, if it's okay to talk about that now.
Yeah, go for it.
So in the script notes, there's a small paragraph that discusses how Nora is supposed to be, not necessarily to act, but how they inevitably want the audience to see her. And so it says, Nora Charles, Nick's wife, is coming through. She is a woman about 26, a tremendously vital person, interested in everybody and everything, in contrast to Nick's apparent indifference to anything except when he is going to get his next drink. There is a warm, understanding relationship between them. They are really crazy about each other, but undemonstrative and humorous in their companionship. They are tolerant, easygoing, taking drink for drink, and battling their way together with a dry humor. And I think you totally get that from how they play these characters.
Absolutely. And they have like little, it's like they have inside jokes. They have inside jokes that they share with only, it's like the audience is in on the jokes between the couple. And their audience gets that across very clearly, and how they speak to one another, how they have to interact with one another in different settings. And the drinking, oh my gosh, yeah. This film, there's so much drinking. I mean, I kind of had to walk away. I'm like, and go, well, I feel a little sober right now. It's good.
And not a lot of mixed drinks either. It's just straight glasses, tall glasses.
Oh yeah, you want
It's
vodka?
straight hard liquor.
Straight up on the rocks, maybe. But yeah, there's a lot of drinking in this movie. But I think that's what makes it fun, is because they're feeling the times of the 1930s post-prohibition. So they're an active, happy, childless couple. This is early on in their marriage. Nora is the one with the money. And Nick, he has a bit of a past. So, because he's worked in detective work for so long, he knows pretty much everyone. But the thing that's so great about his character is that he keeps an open mind. He's not judgmental despite someone's background.
Right.
He's still aware of it. He's not just, he doesn't disregard it. But he looks at the situation and he sees the sense of, well, is this true or is it not true? And you see that a lot. And Nora, she just kind of goes along with the flow. She takes what he says with respect, going, okay, well, these are Nick's friends, and that's still a comment she'll make about his friends. She's like, I love your friends so much, and, because he does. He has a very unusual background, so he has all types of connections, and that's the best part about his character, is that he's well likable, even among the ones who may have not he've put in jail before.
Yeah, there's one guy who he said, he comments, or Nora asks him, how did you meet and stuff, and he goes, well, how did you get put in jail, basically? How did Nick catch you? He goes, oh, it was all an accident. I should have led with my right. And it's so funny. It's like, because they get along with everybody. It makes it's a respect for, regardless of the person's past. They still give them the respect that the person deserves and benefit of the doubt.
And Nora kind of has that, she comes across as kind of like, the thing that's really great about her character is that it starts in this film, and as the films progress, you start to see this development of her character and her spunk. But I think what you see in their characters is this development over time, though, of Nora growing, her character more. So you actually see how sharp she is and why Nick respects her the way he does. She kind of has that, when you first see her, you think, God, she's kind of uppity, at first. She kind of has that moment of coming across uppity, but then you realize that's the exact opposite. She's quite aware of everything, but she doesn't take things heavily. She obviously does love her husband. She does care about people around her. She does care about the welfare of others. But she's also very calm when it comes to certain situations where other people would have flipped out long before. So she has a very calm, I guess it's a nice yin and yang personality between the two of them. They're very alike, but they're very different at the same time. You there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Now, with the film, this particular one, as the film goes on, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. We don't want to give away spoilers because we do want people to enjoy the film, see the interactions between the characters more in a fresh state of mind, I guess, is the best way to put it. I don't know. What would you say? Go ahead. Go for it.
Sorry. I would think that it's definitely a movie that you should watch at least twice. The first time, watch it, just to enjoy it, just to, a non-political, non-agenda, just a very nice, step away from the day-to-day life and just enjoy the movie. And the second time, you can watch it and go, oh, now I see why that happens. Oh, there's a clue.
Right.
Instead of watching it with that kind of knowledge you have of the ending of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Because that's the thing about the Thin Man series films. I would say all the films are really good. The last film in the series I'm not a fan of. When we get to that one, that's the one I'll probably destroy. But the rest of them I enjoyed immensely. Like I have very few complaints. This one, I really didn't have any complaints. There was I think it was a lot of well-written dialogue, fast, witty dialogue that made you pay attention. But it also, I think, catches you off guard when the twists come.
Yes.
And I know with the films as they gone on, there were some really great films. Jimmy Stewart was in one of them. There's a lot of other little actors and actresses that popped up in the early parts of their career when they were first coming out into film. And also later on that went on to television. But with the Thin Man, the very first one, it kind of set that precedence. So as you get into the other films, you're starting to see development of their characters, and obviously, with Dashiell Hammett's, influence in the first film, you can tell the difference as time went on. But you can see his impact was still there. It's still very residual. It's still his characters. All they did was build on them. And I'm sure there was differences of opinion on things. I'm sure behind closed doors there were. But overall, the characters are very memorable. I liked the rhythm of the film. And it didn't feel rushed. How like when you do sit through some of these films, it feels entirely too rushed. Or too slow. It's like you have to find the right pacing. And I think the Thin Man did that.
And I think one thing that I noticed was there wasn't a scene where I thought, okay, they really could have cut that. Or it wasn't padding the runtime. Every scene was good and it was worth it and it was worthy to be kept in the movie. Where some movies say, you're like, that movie was 3 hours long. They could have cut 45 minutes. This was the entire runtime was packed with fun and excitement and things that were important to the movie. It wasn't just padding the runtime.
Right. I mean, everything is important. So even if, like, I've rewatched these films enough that it's like it's rewatchable. And to me,
Very.
that's a huge thing, right? Like some films I see once, I'm like, okay. Like I've seen The Maltese Falcon, I think 3 times. Yeah, and I liked it. It's not, and I rewatched it because you know how like your memory goes bad, and you're like, I forgot, and I watch it again. I'm like, ah, yeah, 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 I remember this now, and you know now I remember it pretty well. But with the Thin Man series, I generally remember the films pretty well. I remember certain things that stick out. It's usually the interactions, the small things. In the first film, I would suggest paying attention to the small interactions between Nick and Nora, because it was such an unusual coupling. As types of characters, meaning on-screen characters, not so much the actors themselves are a great couple, but it's their chemistry that they had in those characters that made them so recognizable enough where the films had so many sequels. And there was a reason for that. It's the little interactions and the little quips and the little commentary. Um, you know, the first things out of their mouth in the first 5-10 minutes of the film are hilarious between the both of them. If you're paying attention, you know, you'll see that on screen. You know, they're interacting, they're talking about drinking together. Um, you know, they have a very easygoing relationship where she does, like you had mentioned earlier, she really does understand that he needs to go back to detective work because she knows that's where his passion lies, even though he's lying to himself a little bit about becoming a businessman, you know, helping her run her family business. Like she's well aware that's not going to be enough for him because that's not how his brain works at all. He has to stay intrigued a little bit with life and busy on some level. And she's very understanding of that. But I think these films have that uh, long-term longevity, and that's the thing. These are lobby cards that were released back in the 60s because they re-released The Thin Man into theaters. So they actually went ahead and released these lobby cards because that's the popularity of this film. It still had that retaining value, even though in the 1960s, you know, this is just after the TV series ended. People still love this film, so they re-released it to theaters. I don't know how I would feel about this film being remade or the series being remade. Oh God, I don't know how I feel about that. What do you
I
think?
was actually thinking about that, and I don't think that it would. I don't think that it would work. I think that first of all, the first film being in black and white works perfectly. I think if you tried to do it, even like to remake the first film in color, it wouldn't work. There's something so romantic and special about the black and white. But I don't think that anything would translate if they tried to do it into modern times.
Yeah.
There would be too much sex, violence. It would not work.
Hmm.
It would be more Hollywoodized with things blowing up and exploding versus the actual characters themselves.
I think, like you're saying, less is more. You know, this type of film, less is more. And, you know, could it be well written, I think, into something that's a little modern, but still leaving it in that time frame? Well, yes, absolutely. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that would fit those roles right now.
No.
There's too many models that have become actresses.
Yes.
um, and the truth is, having the proper chemistry with those characters and being able to translate that just right on the screen would be. I don't know. I can't see it. Does that make sense? Like, I just can't. I can't really see it right now. I'm sure there's some great actors and actresses that have that ability, but I would be very cautious to remake a film like this. That's for sure.
I agree. Because I think it would be more about whose PR person is better versus what two characters have actual genuine chemistry.
Absolutely. And, you know, with the Thin Man film, it started the series. This is like the first, excuse me, the first step as the film, you know, franchise takes off essentially and gets this huge following. It still does have a following. It's just, it's a, in my opinion, it's one of those like, not a cult following because it's just an older film. I think the classic movie genre in general, everybody's got their favorites, right? Whether it's the crime noir, you know, crowd, or you get into more of like the Western crowd that are into the classic Westerns and all that stuff. And just the traditional crowd too, that are in like Gone with the Wind category. But with the Thin Man series, it kind of stands alone in that detective friendly um, suspense where it's not dark and scary, but it's more lighthearted and structured in a sense where it's audience friendly. And it's a feel good type film too. So it's not like you're going to walk away devastated by all things. There's some dark, don't get me wrong, there are some dark storylines that pop up within the series that are really sad. This is also part of that to an extent, but you're not left with that bad taste in your mouth when you walk out of the theater. Or, hey, you turn it off your local streaming service. Whatever. But what would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, would you say? 10 being, of course, great, 1 being complete trash.
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say somewhere between like an 8 and a 9.5, because for me, I had trouble a little bit, and this is just personal, with some of the characters, making sure who was who, and that could just be my brain sort of going left when it should be going right, you know.
Absolutely.
But it was, maybe just a solid 9, I think, because it was so good. It was a lot of fun. It made you think, and it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't predictable.
Right.
And it was just, there was great costuming. The characters were fun with one another. They were believable people.
Right.
And that's very refreshing, because you don't always get that. So I would say probably a solid 9.
Yeah, I'm in the category of, I would say for me, it's almost a strong 9. Mine's like at 8.5 going on 9. Reason why it's not a 10 is because obviously there's those moments of repetitiveness, because you're trying to, you can tell they were trying to kind of keep the audience on the same page. As the films went on, that kind of dissipated, meaning that angle of, okay, this is who this is who that is. I think the first film was about they were trying to ensure that the audience could keep up in step with the story. I think the best scene of the film was the dinner party, which I do not want to get into too much, obviously. But I really enjoyed that scene of everyone at the dinner table and how that was, brought together towards that ending of the film. I like the way that they did that. I like a lot of the commentary. I like the connections and the way that they set that up. But prior to that, though, like you were saying, though, yes, I agree. There was a lot of like, okay, this is who this is, and they're kind of hand-holding the audience a little too much. But as the films went on, the writing, I think, got better. And you start to see that they're doing less hand-holding. And they're doing more of like, well, now you already have our characters. You already have an established understanding of how they act or how they interact. And because it had gained so much popularity at the time of their release, by the time they got to the other films, it wasn't so much of a big deal anymore. Now
it was very much the pilot episode. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's just like a pilot episode. Okay, everybody, now that you know all the players, now let's get into some other stuff. But the first film, that was 8.5. I would say strong, almost a strong 9. The 8.5 part is just, a little bit of the repetitiveness, the way that they brought scenes together, the likability of the characters, even the ones you didn't think you were going to like, you kind of liked, and the ones you think you weren't going to like, you ended up liking. So it has that feel to it in the end, where you walk away with a good taste in your mouth.
Definitely had that with two of the female characters, where one I should have liked but didn't, and one I shouldn't have liked, I did.
Right. And that was the part where I was like, aha, I see what you did. But that is the part where, we don't want to break the whole film down. We just want to give you a good synopsis of it in the sense of, we want you to walk into it with a fresh pair of eyes and know a little bit about the background, about the film, and about the history of the characters. As the other films come into play and we start to review those more into synopsis, that'll help kind of connect the dots to the first film, because the first film was kind of like you said, a pilot episode. Absolutely. Anyway, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the extravaganza before we end our review?
I think what you talked about with Dashiell Hammett, with all the books he had written and all the places that his books, magazines, that his stories had appeared. The one Red Book magazine where the Thin Man appeared just sold on eBay this June for $550. And so, like
Oh
you said, it's
God.
still, people still want it. They still are interested in it. And so there's still an audience out there for this
Hmm.
type of story.
And I highly recommend it. For me, it's like if you see it on TCM or your local streaming service, I hope that they do put them all out. Because there's a lot of people I know who have not seen all the films. I have, you have. Um, the next film I'm going to probably rewatch again, so I can make notations a little bit and point out some things I noticed. With this film, I don't want to give away too much because I think the reason why is that it's going to set the tone for the other films to some extent, meaning how the storyline, they're all uniquely different, don't get me wrong, but there's a feeling that the film carries on its own that
Yes.
is comfortable, but still the mystery is there. So you're not, walking away like, oh my God, I just walked out of a swamp. You're left with a good taste in your mouth. You're not walking away from the film being like you wasted your time. They're relatively short films too. They're not like 2 hour long extravaganzas of crap. you know, I mean that with love and respect. Um,
It's true though.
but I mean, some of these films are ridiculously long, and I'm like, this could have been an hour, and I would have gotten way less of the filler, like we were talking about earlier. But it's important. I think this is a film that's rewatchable. It's something safe that you can watch around your kids.
Yes.
There's the sexual innuendos are very minimal, but as time goes on, there's how they say things change. So you get a lot of good one-liners, and that's the brilliance of writing is the one-liners. I think if you have to explain your joke, that makes it pretty boring. And with the Thin Man, a lot of their jokes are so quick that they don't need to elaborate on it. It's how their interactions and the physicality between the two characters. There's a scene, for example, where a friend of theirs comes over, an attorney comes over to use a phone in their house, and Nick and Nora in the background. This is like probably in the first 20 minutes of the film, for example. Nora's kind of recovering a little bit from a hangover, and Nick and her are standing in the background next to the fireplace. Their friend is using the phone, so his back is turned to them, and the two of them are going back and forth. Like he does something to mess with her, she reacts to him like physically. So like they're both quiet. Keep that in mind as their friend's talking on the phone. So you're hearing his conversation, but you're watching them in the background. And he goes to pretend he's going to hit her, and she does the whole like, "Oh no, he's going to get me," and he doesn't, of course. But then she goes to hit him, and he does the same reaction. So they bounce back and forth. That's something that you didn't see in films back
No.
then. I mean, that sounds awful, but it's true. Women were often like, "Oh, you can beat your wife and it's okay," kind of crap, right? Well, that scene was showing you their dynamic, though, and their chemistry and of understanding and respect between the two of them, that they can do those types of jokes with one another and not degrade one another in the same process, and still have a joke and make the audience feel like, oh, this is lighthearted, it's fine. And then when they're doing this back and forth bantering, their friend who's on the phone turns back because he hears them moving about, and he kind of catches the tail end of them going back and forth, and Nick's like, everything's cool, like everything's fine, don't worry about it, and the guy didn't know any different. And I love
Yeah.
that whole little exchange. There's a lot of those exchanges, just like the screenshots we showed you earlier of them making faces at one another. It's those the audience is in on the joke and everyone else in the film is not, and that's the purpose of kind of making you fall in love with those characters and the story of what Nick's getting himself involved in. So you do find yourself emotionally involved, like you could see hanging out with this couple, with your own family. That's kind of the feeling you walk away with. So that's what's so, I think, great about the film. There was very few films back then that I actually, it's the only one that sticks out that had that same feeling, that you didn't walk away like you wasted your time. I do definitely recommend people watch The Thin Man. It's one of my favorite films. It's rewatchable. Like we've mentioned this a million times, but I want people to go and check it out. I think the sad part is a lot of people don't. They'll say, "Oh, I've watched it," and they haven't watched it. But just let it sit. It's a movie that you can kind of chill with and not feel stressed, not walk away with stress, and especially with things the way they are right now. Everyone's tense, so it's nice to be able to take a step back in time and kind of see how things were, especially in a relationship like
And to
Nick and
watch
Nora.
something that's not preachy, something that's just, they said, calm, relaxing, fun, but not preachy. So you don't feel like you're being lectured to. It's just a fun afternoon.
Yeah, and you can watch these. I mean, you could literally do a marathon of these films and have a good day and be pretty chill about it. There are always going to be little things that'll stick out in a film that you'll remember. It's always the interactions of quick-wittedness, the one-liners, the aha moments, which I don't, like I said, I don't want to get into. I want the film to come across fresh for an audience in the sense of I want you to experience it without us spoiling it for you. Even if you've already watched it, it's always fun to rewatch these films because you see over time how their dynamic changes. And there are other films in the series I like a hell of a lot more than the first one, you know. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with Lady Peri and I. We're going to actually be doing
Thank
all
you.
of the Thin Man films. This is just the first among all of them. And we're hoping that we'll get more deep into the films as it goes along because this is the introduction film. So really, you're seeing a lot more about the dynamic of the relationship. It's not a romance film; it is a mystery film slash detective film, crime film. But it still has all of those warm tendencies that a lot of crime films and gangster films of that time didn't really carry. You had moments, but you didn't have a film that was able to keep that warm feeling going, even when it was dark twists in the storyline, if that makes sense.
Very well said.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Perry, for hanging out and doing this. This is her first real movie discussion type review.
Well, thank you
Uh,
for having me.
oh, yeah. I think you did great. I think you did
Thank
really
you.
great. But anyway, thank you so much to everybody in our audience. And I guess we'll talk to everyone later.
Bye.